The city of San Francisco glittered that evening like a promise too bright to believe. From the rooftop terrace of the Fairmont, where the elite gathered to toast innovation and excess, the skyline pulsed with ambition. Glass towers reflecting gold and violet from the dying sun. Inside the ballroom, laughter shimmered like champagne bubbles, and all eyes gravitated toward Evelyn Carter, the woman everyone wanted to be. At 34, Evelyn was a living headline, the female visionary behind a $550 million deal. She had founded Byte Technologies, a data integration startup that had grown from a cramped studio apartment to one of Silicon Valley's fastest-rising firms. Every camera loved her. The sharp jawline, the tailored white suit, the confidence that filled every room. Her speech tonight was perfect, witty, polished, a masterclass in how to make power sound humble. Across the room, half hidden behind a marble column, Nathan Hale watched his wife. His tie was slightly loosened, his eyes distant. The guests who passed him assumed he was someone's assistant, maybe a +1. Few knew that Nathan had once been a novelist, whose first book had made small ripples in literary circles before sinking into obscurity. Now he rarely spoke about writing at all. Evelyn didn't ask anymore. When the applause came, Evelyn smiled, her diamond earrings catching the light. To partnerships, she declared, raising her glass of vintage Cabernet, to believing that limits are only ideas. The crowd cheered. Nathan clapped politely, a faint smile brushing his lips. Not pride, not resentment, just something quieter, harder to define. After the speech, Evelyn drifted through the sea of admirers, shaking hands, accepting compliments that blurred together. She thrived on that chaos, the energy, the validation, the illusion of control. When she finally reached Nathan, he was standing near the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. "You could at least look like you're enjoying this," she teased, her voice silk wrapped around steel. He turned to her, the corners of his mouth twitching. "You know I've never been much for crowds." "They're not just a crowd," she said, lowering her voice. "They're the future of this company, of our life." Nathan's gaze lingered on her, a trace of sadness flickering there. "Sometimes I wonder if there's any part of our life left that isn't a company." She frowned, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve. "You always find a way to make things sound heavier than they are." He didn't answer. Silence pressed between them, thick and familiar. From across the room, Richard Lane, a venture capitalist with an expensive smile, called out, "Evelyn, the woman of the hour." He placed a hand on her shoulder, the way men in power often do, ownership disguised as admiration. Evelyn laughed, stepping closer to him. Nathan watched the gesture, the subtle shift in her posture, the way she performed confidence like it was armor. He remembered when that same laugh had been genuine, the sound of warmth and wonder, not survival. Hours later, when most of the guests had drifted out and the jazz band played its final song, Evelyn and Nathan stood side by side, though miles apart in spirit. She was scrolling through congratulatory messages on her phone, messages from journalists, investors, influencers, while he stared at the empty glasses on their table. "You did great," he said finally. She looked up, distracted. "Huh?" "Your speech, it was beautiful." "Thank you," she replied automatically, already typing another reply. Then, glancing up, she added, "You didn't have to come, you know? I know these things bore you." "I came because you asked," he said simply. For a fleeting moment, something in her expression softened, a flicker of the woman he used to know, but it vanished just as quickly. "You've changed, Nathan." "Maybe. Or maybe I just stopped pretending." She sighed, pocketing her phone. "You could do something, you know? Start another book. Find your spark again." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm waiting for life to give me something worth writing about." Her laugh was light, but there was an edge to it. "That's what people say when they've run out of ideas." The words hung there,
sharp as glass. Nathan didn't flinch. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, she felt the weight of his gaze like a mirror she didn't want to face. Outside, the wind swept through the terrace, carrying the scent of the bay. Evelyn's phone buzzed again. She turned away to answer it. Nathan took one last sip of his wine, set the glass down, and said softly, "Congratulations, Ev." When she turned back, he was gone. Later that night, in their penthouse apartment overlooking Nob Hill, Evelyn stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the glowing city below. The deal was done. The future was hers. Yet the silence of the apartment pressed in, an expensive kind of emptiness. Nathan's desk sat untouched in the corner, his unfinished manuscript still open on the laptop. She glanced at the screen, at the first line of his latest draft. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. She closed the laptop slowly. From the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of red wine, the same Cabernet she'd toasted with earlier, and watched the reflection of her own face in the dark liquid. Somewhere deep down, she felt the faintest tremor of something she couldn't name. Unease, regret, or maybe just the whisper of a truth she wasn't ready to face. Tomorrow, there would be more meetings, more applause, more headlines. But tonight, for the first time, Evelyn Carter felt the quiet ache of winning alone. The following Friday, the city glowed with a false kind of warmth. Golden hour light bouncing off the glass towers, the promise of celebration hanging in the air. Evelyn's team at Sinerbite Technologies had booked the private dining hall of the Marlowe, a Michelin-starred restaurant in Soma, to celebrate the official signing of their $550 million partnership. The rooms shimmered in gold and ivory tones, soft jazz playing beneath the chutter of polished voices. Evelyn arrived late, as always, timing her entrance perfectly, the way one times a performance. The moment she stepped in, conversations paused for a beat. She was radiant in a midnight blue dress, her hair swept into a sleek bun, confidence flowing from every step. She moved like someone used to being observed. At the far end of the table, Nathan Hale sat quietly beside a window overlooking the Bay Bridge, a reluctant guest in his own marriage. Evelyn had insisted he come, saying, "People like to see the woman behind the empire has a husband who supports her." It hadn't been a request. When she approached, Nathan stood, brushing invisible wrinkles from his blazer. "You look different tonight," he said, tone careful. "Different good or different bad?" He smiled faintly. "Just different." Evelyn didn't reply. She was already turning to greet her team, slipping into charm like a second skin. Dinner began with champagne toasts, laughter, and the hum of polite ambition. Across from Nathan sat Richard Lane, Evelyn's investor and self-appointed mentor, the kind of man who made every conversation feel like a chess match. He leaned in toward Evelyn, his voice low and smooth. "You know, Evelyn, what you've accomplished at your age is extraordinary. Most men I know couldn't dream of handling pressure like this." Evelyn laughed, that soft, rehearsed sound that made people feel they'd said something brilliant. Well, maybe that's why they needed a woman to get it done. The table erupted in applause. Nathan forced a smile. Plates arrived, seared scallops, truffled risotto, a $600 bottle of Cabernet opened with ceremony. Evelyn raised her glass. "To growth," she said. "To risks worth taking. And to everyone who believed when others didn't." Glasses clinked, the wine flowed. As the evening deepened, the atmosphere shifted from professional to indulgent. Laughter grew louder, touches lingered longer. Evelyn, glowing with success and alcohol, began to unwind. She teased her colleagues, told stories of late-night meetings, celebrated her unstoppable team. But beneath her triumph, there was a tension, a kind of restless electricity. The more she talked, the more Nathan felt invisible. When dessert arrived, Richard Lane leaned closer to Evelyn again, brushing her wrist as he poured her another glass. "You must be exhausted carrying all this brilliance around," he said, a grin playing on his lips. Nathan caught it. The gesture, the tone, and something inside him tightened. He wasn't jealous, not exactly. It was more like a quiet grief, watching her perform, watching her lose herself in the image she'd built. Evelyn turned toward Nathan suddenly, eyes bright, lips curling into a mischievous smile. "You've been quiet all night. What's going on in that writer's head of yours?"
He looked up slowly, meeting her gaze. "Just listening," he said. "Oh, come on," she pressed, the wine making her bold. "You used to be poetic. Say something about success, or about me." The table laughed. Cameras flashed. Someone whispered, "She's on fire tonight." Nathan's expression didn't change. "I think success is complicated," he said quietly. "Sometimes it tells you what you want to hear until you forget what you used to believe." The laughter faltered for a beat. Evelyn rolled her eyes, trying to turn the moment. "See, this is what I live with, the philosopher." Then, with a half laugh, she lifted her glass and said, "Well, let's drink to that then. To the husbands who don't understand our world but still show up anyway." The room chuckled. Nathan gave a polite nod. But Evelyn, flushed with wine and adrenaline, wasn't done. She reached across the table, grabbed the bottle of Cabernet, and, in one impulsive theatrical motion, tilted it over Nathan's chest, spilling a dark crimson stain across his shirt. Gasps rippled around the room. "Oh, relax," she laughed, tossing her head back. "It's just wine. My husband's tougher than he looks." The laughter this time was forced, uncertain. Cameras were still for once. Nathan sat still, wine dripping from his collar, his face unreadable. Slowly, he dabbed his shirt with a napkin, the fabric trembling only slightly in his hand. He looked up at Evelyn, and for a moment, their eyes locked, hers gleaming with reckless pride, his with something quieter, deeper. He smiled, just barely. "I think success is—" He smiled, just barely. "You're right. I'm tougher than I look." Then he stood, folded the napkin neatly beside his plate, and said, "Excuse me." The room was silent as he walked out. Evelyn watched him go, her laughter fading. Someone tried to lighten the mood, a nervous joke, a refill of champagne, but the spell had broken. Her cheeks burned, though she told herself it was just the wine. Later, when the party ended and the guests had scattered into waiting cars, Evelyn remained alone at the table. The stain on the linen where Nathan had sat looked like a wound spreading across white silk. Outside, the wind from the bay carried a chill that slipped through the cracks of the restaurant's perfection. Richard approached gently. "He'll get over it," he said. Evelyn forced a smile, though something in her chest ached in a way she couldn't name. "Yeah, he always does." But that night, when she returned home to their penthouse, the lights were off. Nathan's desk was empty, his laptop gone, his coat missing from the rack. For the first time in years, the apartment was truly silent. She walked into the kitchen, still half drunk, and looked down at her hands. The faint smell of Cabernet clung to her skin. She thought about his eyes. Not angry, not hurt, just distant. And the quiet certainty in his voice. "I'm tougher than I look." Somewhere deep down, Evelyn knew she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Tomorrow, she would wake to another day of praise and press coverage. But tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, the sound of her own laughter echoed like something broken.
Morning arrived without sound. The city outside their penthouse stirred to life, honking cars, distant sirens, seagulls circling the bay. But inside, There was only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the echo of absence. Evelyn woke alone. At first, she thought Nathan had simply gone for his usual morning walk, the one he took whenever he needed space from her late-night tirades or endless work calls. But when she reached for his side of the bed, the sheets were cold. Not recently empty, cold in a way that told her he'd been gone for hours, maybe longer. She sat up, trying to remember the night before, fragments flashing like broken glass. The dinner party, the wine, the laughter, the look on his face. Her stomach twisted. Downstairs, the living room was spotless, except for the faint scent of Cabernet clinging to the air. His shoes were gone. So was his coat. The drawer in the entryway where he kept his wallet and keys was empty. She opened his desk drawer, papers, old drafts, a few pens, but the laptop was missing. Evelyn's heart began to thud harder. She tried to steady herself. He's probably just angry. He'll come back. Nathan always came back. That was part of their rhythm. She pushed too far, he retreated, then he forgave. She made coffee, though she barely touched it. Her hands shook as she scrolled through her phone, pretending to check emails but secretly looking for any message from him. Nothing. Not a text, not even a voicemail. By noon, she was pacing. Her assistant, Clara, called to remind her about a strategy meeting. Evelyn forced a bright voice. Of course, I'm on my way. But when she hung up, she didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the skyline, wondering if Nathan was somewhere down there, watching the same view, just from a different window. At Signer Bite, the atmosphere buzzed with congratulations. Everyone was still high on the afterglow of the deal. Evelyn walked through the glass doors like a ghost dressed in perfection. Her team greeted her with smiles and lattes, oblivious to the storm beneath her skin. Rough night? Richard Lane joked when he saw her in the boardroom. She smiled thinly. Just tired. Success has a hangover, apparently. He laughed. Well, that's a good problem to have. The meeting blurred. Words like expansion, valuation, global partnership floated around her. But her mind kept flashing back to Nathan's expression at the dinner table. How calm he'd been as the wine spread across his shirt, and how he hadn't raised his voice once. That silence had terrified her more than any anger could. During a break, Clara handed her a folder. These are the updated partnership documents from Hale Capital. Evelyn froze. From where? From Hale Capital, Clara repeated. They're the holding group behind the acquisition. Didn't you know? Evelyn blinked. I thought it was Westbridge Ventures. That's the public front. Hale Capital is the majority shareholder. Kind of poetic, right? Same name as your husband? Evelyn forced to laugh, but her pulse quickened. Yeah, coincidence.
But her mind didn't let it go. The name Hale. The mysterious investors who had appeared midway through negotiations. The unusual terms Nathan had barely reacted to when she'd mentioned them weeks ago. A strange chill spread through her chest. That evening, she went home early. The apartment was darker than usual. She half expected to see him sitting at the kitchen island, typing something or reading. But the space felt abandoned, eerily so. She opened the fridge. His favorite green tea still sat on the top shelf. His book lay half-read on the coffee table. But his toothbrush was gone. His jacket missing. His scent fading. She sat on the couch, staring at the place where he used to sit. The silence wrapped around her, not peaceful, but suffocating. When her phone rang, she jumped. It was Richard again. You disappeared on me, he teased. Rough day? Evelyn hesitated. Nathan left. Left? You mean like for the weekend? I don't know, she whispered. He was silent for a moment, then said, Maybe it's for the best. You've outgrown him, Ev. He doesn't understand the world you live in anymore. Evelyn closed her eyes. He understood it better than anyone. After hanging up, she poured herself another glass of wine.
The same Cabernet. She stared at the red liquid, the memory of it dripping down his shirt replaying in her mind. Her hand trembled. Then she noticed something on the counter, a folded envelope propped against the fruit bowl. Her breath caught. It was her name, written in his careful handwriting. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note. You once told me that love is the art of staying seen and a world built on destruction. I tried to stay seen, but lately I think you only saw what I reflected back to you, the version of yourself you wanted to believe in. You poured wine on what was left of us. Now all I can do is let it dry. The words blurred as her eyes filled. She set the letter down, pressing a hand to her mouth, but the sob never came. Only a quiet exhale, like a confession. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one, indifferent to her grief. Evelyn sat there until night swallowed the apartment whole. Days passed. She went to work, smiled for interviews, posed for photos beside executives she couldn't stand. The world celebrated her success while she pretended to belong to it. But at night, she scrolled through her messages, reread the note, and checked his social media. Nothing. His accounts were gone. Deleted. By the fifth day, her carefully built composure began to crack. She called old friends, former publishers, anyone who might know where he'd gone. No one had seen him. Some didn't even know they were still together. That last discovery hurt most of all. On the sixth night, she returned home late, kicked off her heels, and sank onto the couch, exhaustion consuming her. For the first time, the city outside didn't feel like possibility. It felt like punishment. She thought about the man who had once written love letters in coffee shops, who had whispered stories to her before they fell asleep. The man who had believed in her when she had nothing but a dream. Now all she had was everything except him. She closed her eyes and whispered his name into the empty room. But only the refrigerator answered back. And in that silence, Evelyn Carter finally understood what it meant to win and still lose everything.
The morning after the gala, the world seemed strangely quiet. The sunlight filtered through the curtains of the penthouse, highlighting the faint stain of red wine that still clung to the marble floor. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, her head pounding, not from alcohol, but from the weight of what she'd done. She replayed the scene over and over. The laughter, the spill, the way everyone's eyes had shifted from amusement to discomfort. And Daniel. His silence was louder than anything she'd ever heard. He hadn't come home that night. At first, she assumed he was just cooling off. He had every right to be angry, but surely he'd return once things settled. Daniel was predictable like that. Calm, rational, never one to act impulsively. But by noon the next day, his phone went straight to voicemail. His assistant said he had taken personal leave. Amelia's heart dropped. Daniel never took personal leave. By the second day, her anxiety began to twist into something darker. Fear. The house felt emptier than ever. His clothes were gone from the wardrobe, the framed photos on his side of the dresser missing. The drawer where he kept his watch, cufflinks, and wedding ring box was bare. It was as if he'd been erased overnight. And then came the email. A formal message from his attorney, short and emotionless. Mrs. Cross, Mr. Cross has retained separate legal counsel and requests no direct contact moving forward. All communication regarding shared assets will be handled through our office. Amelia froze. She read the line again, then again, her pulse quickening with each word. Separate legal counsel? Shared assets? It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She tried calling his mother, his best friend, anyone who might have known something, but all she got was vague responses, polite avoidance, and awkward pauses.
No one wanted to tell her anything. The following week, things began to unravel publicly. The business magazine Forbes Now released an article titled, "Tech Vision Acquired in $550 million Deal. Founder Remains Anonymous." Tech Vision, the very company Amelia had just signed a massive marketing contract with, the deal she'd celebrated at the dinner party, the same night she poured wine on her husband. Curious, she scrolled further. There, at the bottom of the article, was a line that froze her in place. Sources confirmed that the acquisition was led by a private equity firm known for its strategic leadership under D. Cross Capital. Her stomach dropped. D. Cross. She read the name again, her pulse catching with each word. It couldn't be. Daniel had always said he worked in finance, yes, but he'd never mentioned owning anything, let alone a private equity firm. Her mind raced back to all the times she'd dismissed his calm demeanor, mistaking it for passivity, the times he'd asked her about her contracts, her negotiations, and she'd brushed him off. "You wouldn't understand," she had said once, laughing. The memory now cut like glass.
Over the next few days, whispers began circulating in her professional circle. Her assistant looked uneasy. Her business partners avoided eye contact. Clients pulled out of meetings without explanation. Even her PR team began to distance themselves. Finally, one morning, her assistant hesitated at her office door. "Amelia, you should see this." It was a leaked memo, one that had started trending online. A memo from TechVision's internal communication team confirming Daniel Cross's full acquisition of the company and immediate restructuring of all partnerships, including hers. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. Her entire business empire, her agency, her brand endorsements, everything was built on the TechVision contract. Without it, her revenue stream would collapse within months. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, bloggers, influencers, all wanted a statement. The woman who mocked her husband in public, now facing ruin because of him. For the first time in years, Amelia didn't know what to do. She had always been the one in control, the one who gave orders, who closed deals, who smiled for cameras. But now, every move she made seemed meaningless. Daniel had disappeared, yet his presence was everywhere. In the headlines, in the contracts, in the silence that haunted her home. Late that night, she sat alone in her office, surrounded by the cold glow of her computer screen. She opened the old photo folder on her desktop, a habit she'd almost forgotten. There they were. Daniel smiling at their wedding, Daniel cooking her breakfast on their anniversary, Daniel holding her hand at her first product launch. She hadn't realized how much she had taken for granted. For the first time, tears began to fall slowly. Quiet, unstoppable. She whispered into the dark, as if he might somehow hear her. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't know." But deep down, she suspected he did know. About the mockery, about the arrogance, about the emptiness behind her glamorous life. And now, he had shown her just how much power silence could hold. When the phone rang, she nearly jumped. It was an unknown number. Her hand trembled as she answered. "Mrs. Cross, this is Mr. Daniels from D. Cross Capital. Mr. Cross would like to arrange a meeting, one final discussion regarding your remaining assets." Her heart skipped a beat. A meeting, after weeks of nothing. As she hung up, Amelia looked at her reflection in the dark window. For the first time, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The confident smile, the perfect hair, the ambition, it all looked hollow. Because this time, the game wasn't hers to play anymore.
The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon in a private suite overlooking the city skyline, a place that once hosted Daniel's birthday party, where they toasted to forever. Now, it felt like the stage for an ending. Amelia arrived early. Her hands trembled slightly as she fixed her hair and adjusted her pearl earrings, the same pair Daniel had given her on their 5th anniversary. She almost didn't wear them, but something inside whispered it was right. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of memory. The clock struck 3. The elevator doors slid open. Daniel stepped out. Calm, composed, almost unnervingly so. He wore a charcoal suit, the same quiet confidence in his eyes. But something was different now. His gaze wasn't soft. It was distant, measured. Amelia, a breath took a starting out. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon in a private suite overlooking the city skyline, a place that once hosted Daniel's birthday party where they toasted to forever. Now it felt like the stage for an ending. Amelia arrived early. Her hands trembled slightly as she fixed her hair and adjusted her pearl earrings, the same pair Daniel had given her on their 5th anniversary. She almost didn't wear them, but something inside whispered it was right. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of memory. The clock struck 3. The elevator doors slid open. Daniel stepped out, calm, composed, almost unnervingly so. He wore a charcoal suit, the same quiet confidence in his eyes, but something was different now. His gaze wasn't soft. It was distant, measured. "Daniel?" she breathed, rising to her feet. He gave a polite nod. "Amelia." They sat across from each other, a polished oak table between them. The lawyer who had accompanied Daniel earlier stepped out, leaving them alone. The silence was unbearable. She started, her voice faltering. "I didn't think you'd actually come." He leaned back in his chair. "I wasn't planning to, but I thought you deserved to hear things directly." Amelia swallowed hard. "About the company?" He nodded slowly. "About everything." She exhaled shakily. "Then start, please. I've been in the dark for weeks." Daniel's eyes flickered toward the window, the city's reflection shimmering behind him. "You remember when I told you I was investing in small startups? That was years ago, before your agency took off." She nodded cautiously. "I started with tech, quietly. I didn't want the attention. One of those companies was TechVision. I helped them grow, guided their funding, kept my name off the paperwork. When your agency signed that contract, it was with my firm." Her breath caught. "So when I poured wine on you..." He looked at her then, truly looked at her. "You mocked the man who owned the company behind your biggest deal. But it's not the money that mattered, Amelia. It's what that moment revealed." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What do you mean?"
Daniel sighed, his tone heavy but controlled. "You've changed. The woman I fell in love with used to fight for people, not just profits. You built something beautiful, but somewhere along the way, you started believing you were above everyone else, including me." Amelia's eyes burned. "That's not true. I worked hard. I gave us everything." He shook his head gently. "You gave yourself everything, and in return, you took us for granted." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt thick, almost electric with tension. Amelia wanted to scream, to justify herself, to explain that the party had been a misunderstanding, but the truth clung to her throat like poison. She had mocked him, not just that night, but in countless small ways before. Every time she dismissed his advice, every time she laughed at his simple life, every time she forgot who had been there before the fame. Her voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me, Daniel, about TechVision, about your firm, about any of this?" He looked away, the faintest flicker of pain crossing his features. "Because I wanted to know if you'd still see me the same way. Without the money, without the titles, I wanted to believe love was still the reason you stayed." Tears filled her eyes. "It was, Daniel. It was." He studied her, and for a fleeting second, his expression softened. "Maybe once. But that night, that was when I realized you didn't see me anymore." She reached across the table, desperate, her voice trembling. "Please, Daniel, I made a mistake. I was stupid and drunk and trying to impress people who don't even matter. Don't let that one night destroy everything." He didn't move. "It wasn't one night, Amelia. It was a pattern. You mocked kindness. You called humility weakness. You built walls between us long before the wine ever spilled." Her hand dropped back to her lap. The city lights began to flicker on outside, as if mocking her own fading brilliance. Daniel's tone shifted, softer now. "I didn't come here to hurt you. The contracts, the company, none of that was revenge. I'm restructuring Tech Vision to protect the people who believed in it. But I'm ending our ties, personally and professionally." Her chest tightened. "So this is it?" He nodded slowly. "This is it." A silence settled again, heavy and final. Then Daniel stood, buttoning his jacket. "Before I go," he said, reaching into his briefcase, "I wanted you to have this." He slid a small envelope across the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single photo, her and Daniel years ago, standing in front of their first apartment. Young, messy, hopeful. On the back, in his handwriting, were just 3 words. "You forgot why." Her tears fell freely now. "Daniel!" He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "Goodbye, Amelia." And with that, he turned and walked toward the elevator. She watched as the doors closed around him, his reflection fading until all that remained was her own. For a long time, Amelia just sat there, staring at the photo. Around her, the city buzzed, unaware that her world had just ended, not in a fight, but in quiet truth. In that silence, she finally saw what Daniel had tried to show her all along. Success without respect, power without humility, it was nothing. And maybe that was the cruelest revelation of all.
The confrontation came sooner than Amelia expected. She had spent the night pacing her penthouse, rehearsing every possible scenario, imagining every possible apology, begging silently for Daniel to give her a chance to explain. By morning, she knew that she couldn't wait any longer. She had to face him, not just for herself, but for the remnants of the life they had once shared. She arrived at D-Cross Capital, the building a fortress of steel and glass that reflected San Francisco's skyline like an unyielding mirror. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor of the lobby. Every step felt like a confession. She was supposed to be the woman in control, the dealmaker, the vision behind the empire, but right now she felt exposed, vulnerable, and painfully small. The receptionist hesitated, then nodded toward the elevators. "Mr. Cross is expecting you," she said, her tone polite but cautious. Amelia stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The ascent was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the machinery. She gripped the strap of her handbag tightly, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. She had rehearsed every word, but now that the moment had arrived, her mind was a blur. When the elevator doors opened, she saw him immediately. Daniel stood near the panoramic windows, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the city. The sunlight caught the edges of his suit, giving him an almost ethereal presence, untouchable, precise, and impossibly composed. He turned as she approached. "Amelia," he said, voice steady, not kind but not warm. "Daniel," she replied, swallowing hard, I had to see you. I can't keep pretending everything is fine." He didn't move. "I know why you're here. I need to explain. I was wrong. That night, the dinner party, spilling wine on you, I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean—" "You mocked me," he interrupted, his tone calm, sharp like glass. "Do you understand that? In front of everyone, you humiliated me. And not just that night, Amelia. Over the years, I've watched you build this empire and assume I didn't see the real cost between us in our marriage. You never saw me. You only saw what I could do for you." She flinched. His words cut deeper than she expected. I see you now. I've been blind, Daniel. I didn't realize how much I've hurt you." He shook his head slowly. "You say that now. But when it mattered most, you chose applause, success, validation over us. You chose the spotlight over honesty, over love." Her throat tightened. "I can make it right. Can you?" he said, voice low, almost incredulous.
Can you undo the years of neglect, the dismissals, the arrogance? You think one apology, one heartfelt explanation can erase the contempt you've shown? Amelia felt the weight of every decision she had made. The jokes at his expense, the way she brushed off his advice, the subtle slights she had told herself were harmless. Each memory pressed against her, a silent indictment.
I don't expect it to erase everything, she said finally, voice trembling. But I want you to know I am sorry, truly. And if there's any way to fix this, I will do whatever it takes. I can change. Daniel studied her, the lines of his face softening slightly, but his gaze remained distant, measured. Amelia, I don't need you to change. I need you to see. And maybe now you do. Her eyes welled with tears. Daniel, please, just tell me what I can do. Anything, I can... He held up a hand. You can't buy back respect. You can't undo the choices you've made, the way you've treated me, the way you've treated yourself in the pursuit of success. Amelia's shoulders slumped. Then what? What now? He turned toward the window again, his silhouette outlined by the sun's glare. Now you face the consequences of your actions, personally, professionally, publicly. You'll find that the empire you've built isn't immune to humility, to accountability. And privately, I have to step away. I have to protect myself from what's been broken. Tears streamed down Amelia's face, hot and unrelenting. Daniel, don't leave me like this. He shook his head. I'm not leaving you to hurt you, Amelia. I'm leaving to preserve the part of myself you never cared to see. And maybe now you do. She fell silent, the words piercing deeper than any public scandal could. The office around them was quiet, the city sprawling endlessly beyond the glass, indifferent to their heartbreak. Then, without another word, Daniel walked toward the door, paused and glanced back. This isn't hate, it's clarity. Don't mistake my absence for vengeance. I've merely chosen truth over illusion. The doors closed behind him. Amelia stood alone, the echo of her sobs mingling with the faint hum of the city below. The confrontation had come, but it was not the fiery battle she had imagined. It was quiet. It was final. It was real. She sank to the floor, clutching the edge of the table. The city lights reflected in her tear-streaked face, mocking in their brilliance. The truth had been revealed, and it was harsher than any rumor, harsher than any gossip, harsher than any amount of money she had ever earned. In that silence, Amelia understood success without empathy, ambition without humility, love without respect. These were not victories. They were prisons, and she had built hers herself. She stayed there for hours, long after the sun had set, the weight of everything pressing down. The confrontation hadn't given her closure. It hadn't given her answers. It had only revealed the depth of what she had lost, and the impossibility of ever reclaiming it. The room was still. The city still moved. And somewhere, in the quiet, Amelia realized she had been stripped bare. Not by Daniel, not by circumstance, but by the choices she had made and the truths she had refused to face. And for the first time, she understood that reckoning wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was inside you. And it was unavoidable. The morning after the confrontation, Amelia woke to a world that seemed to have shifted on its axis. The skyline glittered through her penthouse windows, but the city felt colder, sharper, as if it were judging her. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling, and immediately wished she hadn't. Notifications had piled up overnight. Emails, missed calls, social media alerts, news articles. Every headline screamed her failure. PR disaster. Amelia Cross humiliated by husband in public. $550 million deal backed by husband leaves marketing mogul in the dust.
She poured wine on her husband. Now she's losing everything. Her stomach turned. These weren't just stories. They were magnified narratives spinning her private pain into public spectacle. Influencers, journalists, and business forums dissected every detail of the dinner party, speculating about her arrogance, her impulsiveness, her humiliation of the CEO. Some posts mocked her relentlessly. Others expressed sympathy, but sympathy felt hollow. Amelia tried to call her assistant, Clara, but her phone went straight to voicemail. She called her PR team next, hoping for guidance, a way to control the damage, a lifeline. But the responses were tepid and cautious. Every message reminded her that her public image, carefully cultivated over years, was collapsing in real time. By mid-morning, she had realized the truth. She was alone. Even her closest colleagues, who had toasted her victories the night before, now kept their distance. Invitations to meetings were rescinded. Offers to speak at conferences were quietly withdrawn. Partners she had relied on for years suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Amelia walked through her office, once alive with energy, and felt the hollow echoes of absence. The empire she had built felt fragile, brittle, and suddenly, it seemed, entirely dependent on people who no longer believed in her. The phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She answered, her voice tight. "Mrs. Cross, this is the legal office representing Hale Capital. We're contacting you regarding the immediate suspension of all active contracts under TechVision partnerships. Your marketing deal is terminated effective immediately." Her hands shook as she put down the phone. Every news outlet, every business partner, every carefully nurtured relationship she had counted on for security was now a casualty of her actions, of her arrogance, her recklessness, and ultimately her humiliation of Daniel. By afternoon, she was forced to face her employees. The office atmosphere was heavy. The hum of printers and computers no longer masked the tension. She attempted to reassure them, to project authority, but her voice faltered. Every employee she passed avoided eye contact, their expressions a mix of sympathy and uncertainty. They were watching the fall of a leader they had once admired, and there was nothing she could do to stop it.
The media frenzy intensified. Social media commentaries shifted from gossip to analysis. Her public image, her leadership style, her personal life. Hashtags trended globally. Amelia Cross, wine spill scandal, power couple fall. The comments were merciless. Even friends who'd once congratulated her on her achievements posted supportive messages online. But privately, she knew, they were wondering if her downfall was inevitable. That evening, Amelia returned home to her penthouse, the silence feeling more oppressive than ever. The wine stain from the infamous dinner party remained faintly visible on the marble floor, a permanent reminder of her recklessness. She traced it with her finger, the cold surface sending a shiver up her spine. She sank onto the couch, her thoughts racing. Every choice, every casual insult, every dismissive gesture toward Daniel played back in her mind. She realized painfully that her ambition had been intertwined with vanity, and her drive for success had been fueled as much by ego as by talent. She had believed she was untouchable, that the world revolved around her vision, but Daniel had reminded her of a truth she had been too blind to see. Power without respect, achievement without integrity, admiration without empathy, it all crumbles. The next few days were a blur. Every attempt to salvage her public image was met with skepticism or outright mockery. Her lawyers tried to negotiate extensions, but Hale Capital, now fully controlled by Daniel, was unyielding. Social media campaigns aimed at damage control failed to resonate. Even traditional media, who had once praised her brilliance, questioned her judgment and ethics. Alone in her apartment, Amelia stared at the skyline, the city lights blurred by tears. For years, she had measured her life by deals, accolades, and applause. Now she measured it by silence, absence, and consequences. She realized she had lost not just the empire she built, but the man she loved, the respect she once commanded, and most importantly, the sense of who she was.
A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a messenger holding a thick envelope. Inside were financial statements, legal notices, and a single note in Daniel's handwriting. Amelia, this is the consequence of forgetting why we loved each other. Learn from it, or history will repeat itself. Daniel. She dropped the note, her hands shaking, the gravity of her fall pressing down on her chest. For the first time, she didn't just feel the sting of public humiliation. She felt the emptiness of isolation, the bitter taste of a life stripped of illusion. Amelia sat for hours staring at the city below. Once she had believed that ambition and brilliance would protect her from the world. Now she understood the fragility of power and the cost of pride. She realized that the fall was not punishment from Daniel, nor from the media, nor from the public. It was the natural consequence of her own choices. By the end of the week, the empire she had built remained intact in bricks and mortar, contracts and accounts, but it was hollow. People worked for her, yes, but respect had been replaced by caution, admiration by skepticism. The fall had stripped away the glamour, leaving her with the stark, undeniable truth. Success is meaningless without humility. Love without respect is hollow. And pride without awareness is dangerous. Alone in the penthouse, Amelia finally allowed herself to cry, not for the loss of status, but for the loss of the life she had taken for granted. She had fallen, painfully and irrevocably, and in that fall she saw clearly the path she had ignored for so long. Somewhere in the quiet, she whispered Daniel's name, not for reconciliation, not yet, but as a confession, an acknowledgement of her own failings. The fall was complete, but perhaps, she thought, the first step toward understanding, toward redemption, was just beginning. And outside the city continued its relentless motion, indifferent to triumph or defeat, watching only those willing to learn from the consequences of their choices.
The weeks that followed were a slow, quiet unraveling and rebuilding at the same time. Amelia no longer rushed through her penthouse with the same confident strides. Instead, she lingered in small moments, noticing details she had ignored before. The way sunlight fell across the marble floors, the subtle hum of the city at dawn, the fragrance of fresh coffee she brewed herself. The empire she had built externally remained, offices, contracts, accounts, but internally she felt a different kind of construction underway, a reconstruction of herself. After the fall, Amelia stopped chasing accolades. Meetings were shorter, applause no longer mattered, and the camera's flashes held no sway. She began spending time with people she had neglected, mentoring young professionals honestly and without pretense. She wrote emails not to impress but to connect. She listened more than she spoke. Slowly, the hollowness in her chest began to fill, not with power or influence, but with self-awareness and humility. Yet Daniel was still absent. His silence lingered like a shadow across every decision, every victory, and every quiet moment of reflection. Amelia knew she could not undo the past. She could not erase the wine, the humiliation, the arrogance, and the years of subtle neglect. And perhaps, she thought, she should not try. The lessons were embedded too deeply. They could not be extracted without leaving scars. One evening, she decided to visit the rooftop garden of D-Cross Capital, the place where she had once celebrated a major deal, laughing with Daniel at their shared successes. She stepped onto the terrace, the city sprawling beneath her like a glittering map of choices and consequences. And there he was, leaning against the railing, as calm and composed as ever. "Daniel," she said softly. He turned, surprised, but did not seem alarmed. "Amelia," he replied, his voice steady, unjudging. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind carrying the distant sounds of the city. Amelia took a deep breath. "I didn't come to beg. I didn't come to plead. I came to acknowledge, to tell you that I understand now. Not just the dinner party, not just the humiliation, but everything. I see how I failed, not just as a partner, but as a person." He studied her, the faintest trace of a smile in the corner of his mouth. "You have changed," he observed quietly. I hope so, she whispered. I've spent weeks alone with myself, watching the world move past me while I reflected. The empire I thought defined me, it didn't. What mattered was the choices I made and the people I failed to see along the way. I can't undo the past, Daniel, but I can choose differently moving forward. He nodded slowly, considering her words. Acknowledgement is the first step. Many never reach it. Most never reflect honestly on themselves. She let a small smile escape, fragile but genuine. I'm learning that now. Success, power, reputation, they're meaningless without awareness and humility, without love and respect for the people around us. Daniel remained silent, looking out over the city. The sunlight fell across his face, softening the stern lines of authority she had once feared. He seemed neither angry nor forgiving, simply observant, as if he were weighing the truth she carried in her words. Do you think we could ever rebuild trust? Amelia asked, her voice low, almost a whisper carried by the wind. He paused. Trust once fractured cannot be restored to its original form. It can only be rebuilt in a different shape with effort from both sides.
Amelia nodded, understanding that it was not a simple reconciliation she sought. It was recognition. Recognition of past failures, accountability, and a willingness to grow beyond them. That realization she felt was more valuable than any deal, any contract, any public image she had ever achieved. I don't expect us to pick up where we left off, she admitted. But I want you to know I'm trying to be better. Not for you, not for the company, but for myself. And if someday you see that effort, that growth, maybe... Her voice trailed off, but the sentiment remained. Daniel's eyes softened for the first time in months. Maybe, he said, with a tone that held both distance and hope. The future is a blank canvas, Amelia. We can choose to paint it with awareness, integrity, and care, or repeat the mistakes of the past. That choice is yours as much as it is mine. She exhaled, a quiet release of the tension that had gripped her for weeks. For the first time since the wine spilled, since the humiliation, she felt a measure of peace. Not triumph, not victory, not absolution, simply clarity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in warm, fading light, Amelia realized that the true measure of a person was not in accolades, wealth, or public perception, but in the courage to face one's own failings, to accept consequences, and to commit to growth. She understood now that love, respect, humility, and self-awareness were the foundations of any life worth living. Daniel finally turned away from the skyline, his figure silhouetted against the last rays of sun. He didn't extend forgiveness, nor did he offer condemnation. He simply acknowledged her presence, and in that acknowledgement, Amelia felt the weight of her past ease just enough to stand taller, not as the woman who had mocked him, but as someone who had begun to understand herself. The city lights flickered on, indifferent to their personal story, yet somehow offering a quiet witness to a different kind of success, the mastery of self, the reconciliation with one's choices, and the courage to face life with honesty. Amelia Carter, once blinded by ambition, now saw clearly, and in that clarity, she found the first fragile threads of redemption. The reflection she saw in the glass wasn't perfect, wasn't polished, wasn't triumphant, but it was real. And for the first time in her life, that reality was enough.